And I would like to request Mr. Bryan to share his thoughts. Mr. Bryan.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your kind words on the subject and the context that you laid out for us. Just to ask, will it, oh, I see. Very nice. In a moment, I'll share some slides, but I'll allow this lovely slide to remain for a moment. So I'd like to just briefly introduce myself and give a little context for what I'll be sharing here today. My name is Bryan McSweeney. I live in Delhi and have been for now 1.5 years. I, of course, come from America and California. And I work with a group called Education for Life, which is an educational philosophy and approach to education based on the writings and the philosophy of Paramhansa Yogananda, author of Autobiography of a Yogi. And it's a universal approach that tries to pick up education from a holistic thread, seeing all aspects of education as part of a greater whole. And so one of the things I'd like to share today is one of the ways that we do that, an approach to it. And I'd like to specifically focus on the question of sustainability today. Employability, of course, is very important, but if we don't have a world that is sustainable, we won't have a world to work in. And so I think it's apt to sort of start in the sustainable side of things. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to share my screen with you all. Oh, present. Perfect. Please let me know if there's anything wrong. Eventually that will go. Okay. So when we talk about sustainability, there is a lot of different ways to pick that up. And so actually I'd like to first ask, and this is a rhetorical question, we don't have time, unfortunately, to have you all answer this question, but is life even sustainable? Is the life that we're living right now sustainable? And if you're paying attention to the news, if you are watching the climate science, if you're even just looking around sometimes, you drive by the pounds and piles of garbage in the streets sometimes, you've probably had the thought, this can't keep going on. And the answer to this question is twofold. One, if we ask, is life sustainable as we are living it now? I think the clear answer is no. We are heading towards very challenging times in terms of our climate. If you look, I mean, there's many examples that have hit India, but the most prescient at this moment is what's happening in the United States. Texas has been in many parts without electricity and water and food for many days now because of a severe storm, a once in hundreds of years storm that is crippling them. And if you ask most scientists, that comes back to climate change, and even more than that, man-induced climate change. Basically, that human beings and the way that we are living is not sustainable for the planet. The planet is not able to bear the weight of how we're living. And so the key in asking the follow-up question, because we have to say, okay, not surviving is not an option for us. Human beings, we are designed to thrive.
Excuse me, please switch on your mic. You are not audible.
Oh my goodness, have I not been audible this whole time?
Yeah, now it's all right. Please carry on.
Okay, but was anything I said heard?
No, we heard you, only the last couple of sentences we missed.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. I didn't touch anything, but we'll just carry on. Please do interrupt if I disappear, and thank you very much for doing it. Okay, so anyway, basically, the key is we need to find a way to live in a balanced way. And as such, not only for adults, but we have to find a way to give our children, the next generation, the generation that's going to have to deal with many of the problems that are being created now, a way to deal with that. And it all comes back down to balance. Finding a balance between what we need, what we want, the demands that we make of our environment, and everything in between. And one of the ways that we approach this in EFL, and this is not exclusive to us. Of course, we know the famous quote, although my understanding is it wasn't said exactly like this, but the idea of being the change that you want to see in the world. And we have a firm belief, and we've seen through our experience, and you've probably felt the same in your life, that personal change is the only way to actually create global change. We can try to change laws, we can try to create systems, but those laws will not succeed. They will not pass if there isn't a popular support. And there won't be a popular support unless enough individuals out there feel a need for that thing. They feel passionately about that problem and they desire a solution for that problem. And the reason why we're in this mess, in a sense, right now as it is we have grown completely out of touch with our natural environment as society. Not to say that there aren't people who don't have that connection, but as a whole, we are becoming more and more removed from the natural world. And that is causing, actually more than the environmental disaster, there's actually, you could say, a spiritual disaster happening, because mankind is forgetting that our connection with nature is actually something that doesn't just feed our mouths, it doesn't just grow food for us to sustain this body, it actually feeds our soul. And that's the thread I'd like to pick up today in terms of using life skills, which is to say real life experience, to give our children, our students, an experience that causes them to look at nature differently, to look at it as something that is not separate from them, that is not a thing that they are trying to pull resources out of, but is actually, you could say, a part of us. And this comes back to one of the core principles of Education for Life that I'd like to share. This is from the book Education for Life by J. Donald Walters. And it's this idea of, what are we trying to grow in our children? We're trying to help our children to become mature, to become, adults that are ready for the challenges of life. And he said that maturity, this is how he defined maturity, as the ability to relate appropriately to the realities of others. The ability to relate appropriately to the realities of others. Now, what does that mean in the context of life skills? Now, I believe that this is core to every aspect of life skills. But if we wanted to sort of try to pick one, especially if we're going to use the famous list from the United Nations or the World Health Organization, empathy seems to be a real key aspect of that experience of understanding the realities of others. When we're able to put ourselves into the shoes of another person, when we're able to understand the reality fundamentally, I'm going to go back, then we are able to make decisions that don't only take ourselves into account, but take them into account as well. And in EFL, we apply this to all sorts of relationships. But for today, I want to focus on our relationship with the planet. And so there's a bit of a process that we do in order to build this relationship with the natural world. And I'd like to share a little bit of it with you. And then at the end, I'll share a slide that has a number of other resources that if you're interested, you can go and seek out further. Now, the first step in this process is everything we do, we try to give a direct experience to the child. If we sit there and we talk about, okay, nature is good because it provides us food, and then sunlight and photosynthesis, that's all great, and they'll learn how the world works, but they may not form a connection with the world in that sense. And so the world becomes yet another mechanical tool in their mind. Okay, this is a car, this is how it works, this is my computer, this is how it works, and this is nature, and this is how it works. It just becomes another piece of our world rather than something of a foundation in our world. And so the first step is to give them a direct experience. And the way that we do that is, you might have guessed, we take them into nature. Now, on one hand, that may be enough. So much of our education has moved away from the natural world. It used to be in the Gurukula system of India that you would have your classes, under a tree, out in the open space. You would, spend very little time indoors. And of course, there are practical reasons why we've gone more and more inside. But the first step is to bring the child, our children, out into nature. Get them into a park, get them into a forest. It doesn't have to be elaborate. If there's a tree, it counts. If there's a plant, it counts. If you can find some natural body of water, it counts. Because there's a power that is unlocked when we go to these places that we have an experience of that is difficult to match. Now, I want to share a couple little things we do with kids when we're out there, because it actually can really help in the experience for them. Because getting out there does this much. But if you want to bring that experience to the next level and create connection, we have to find a way to have the child or the adult, as may be the case for many of us, experience nature directly. And so this is an example of a game that we do with them in order to give them that perspective. We ask the children to lay down, especially in a place where there's lots of dead leaves, or any kind of leaf, but usually the dead ones are on the ground. And we slowly cover them completely with leaves, feet all the way up to the head, leaving just enough space over their eyes so they are still able to see the trees above them waving in the breeze. And we have them stay there for some time. And at first you think, okay, a young child is not going to stay there very long. But we found that that blanket of leaves gives the child permission to sort of be in that space, to take a moment there and to really feel what is happening. And when they start to notice the trees moving, they start to feel the rhythm of that, when they feel the coolness of the earth below them supporting them, when they feel the crunchy leaves on top of them and then the other leaves that are still living above them, something happens for children. They start to be able to see from Earth's perspective. And that's the key to being able to understand the other. How can we see things from the other perspective? Another thing we do is to offer an opportunity to have heightened awareness of nature. We put children into pairs, and it's a game called Meet a Tree. And we blindfold one of the students. The other student guides that child to a tree, and they can't see anything. So their other senses start to be heightened through this experience. And we take them to a tree, and they might spin them around and move them all with this way and that. And then they bring them to the tree, and the student who's blindfolded is encouraged to touch, feel, smell, maybe taste, if they're an adventurous one, the tree in order to understand it. And because we're relating to the tree now in a way that we've never related to one before, we're so used to seeing a tree and identifying, that's a tree, that's that kind of tree. It's a green tree, it has this kind of leaf, whatever it is. Maybe I even know the species or the genus. But when you take away that knowledge and you have to only experience it through touch, an entire other part of our perception is unlocked. And through that, we're able to feel something a little more subtle about the tree. And what's interesting is after they've spent their time feeling the tree, understanding the tree, they pull back and then they take off the blindfold and they're encouraged to go find their tree. And they always can, because they've connected on some level with this tree. Now, these are just little games, and we have a whole system of games that, again, there are books in my credits slide that I'll go to at the end that you can look at if you're looking for more of these ideas and you want to try something with your class or with your children. But what is happening now is we're building a connection with the other. We're understanding the perspective of the other. And through that, we start to build empathy. And then all of a sudden, you know, you have that connection with this tree, with this plant, with this animal, whatever it is. When somebody says, oh, we're going to cut down those trees in order to do X, Y, and Z, all of a sudden, you're not only thinking about what you're going to get, but you're thinking about what you're going to lose. And just having that one little thought that comes in, if we had an entire generation of children that had access to that feeling, a lot of the climate challenges we see would start to disappear, because we as a society would make more positive decisions about sustainability, because it would come naturally from the heart. As long as it comes from the head, oh, I should help the planet, but I really want that new phone. Oh, I should help the planet, but I could make some money if I cut down all this forest. Nothing is going to change. And so the last step you see is we offer some biological, some scientific, and maybe even some spiritual reasons to protect life at that stage, once they've had that connected experience. Just briefly like to touch on why this works, and then I'll end my presentation there. Essentially, all human beings are operating at a frequency. When we're really agitated, our frequency is very staccato, it's very high. You could think of it, if you think about like audio frequency or any other kind of light frequency, when our frequency is very high, it means we're moving very, very quickly, and our minds are very agitated, and our thoughts are all jumbled, and we actually get anxious. It causes anxiety. It's part of why anxiety and depression are such a challenge for us these days, is the whole world, society, media has such a high frequency. It's always asking for our attention, asking us to look at this. When we go into nature, something magical happens, which is we start to have our frequency tuned slowly, slowly to its frequency. And the frequency of nature is very slow. Trees live hundreds of years. Whales live hundreds of years. There's just rock formations last millions of years. Forests, you know, the individual trees may die, but forests can last generation after generation. And so the vibratory frequency of these places has a power of its own, and it helps our children, it helps us to calm ourselves down. I think everyone in the world has had some experience like this with nature, where you've gone to a natural place and you've just felt this moment of awe, A-W-E, but also A-H, the relaxation that comes from it. But the awe of how deeply impressive the natural world is. And if we can sow those experiences into the hearts of children from a young age, we will see an entire shift in our society's attitude towards the natural world. And that, more than anything else, will propel us towards a future that is truly sustainable. Thank you very much for having me. I'd like to again thank the Indian Association of Life Skills Education for having us and having this conference, and for you all for being here and for showing interest in these extremely important topics. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan, for your informative and interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Well, in the beginning, there was a problem, a technical problem. The introductory part was actually missing. May I request Chinmay to introduce the other resource persons, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Bryan McSweeney, for your wonderful speech. Bryan McSweeney is a teacher and a product of Education for Life, a system that focuses on preparing children for the challenges of life by prioritizing life skills, personal development, and wholeness. After spending 9 years of his own education in an EFL school in the San Francisco Bay Area, Bryan went on to teach classes from 7 to 12 at a sister school in Nevada City, California. He now lives in Delhi, where he is working on a project to introduce EFL's holistic approach in CBSE schools. Thank you.